Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 5:09 on November 6th. This is the special called meeting for Planning Commission and Council Chambers. We have a quorum on the dais with Todd Shaw missing, and Todd Shaw is there, and Schneider is absent. Okay, so we're going to jump right into our I've got 3 cards. The first one is signed up for A1. And A1 is, remind me again? What's that?
Chair Commission Liaison Interviewer. We don't have anyone signed up for citizens communication, so you'll go straight into the speakers on the code.
Okay, so even though it says A1, it's really A2. All right. Okay, so we'll start with Benjamin Ab from Grove Crest. Abs, sorry, I just can't read it. I'm sorry. You'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm here this evening to talk to you about the apparent disappearance of our city's longstanding asbestos ordinance from the draft LDC. In 2001, following a series of articles by the late statesman environmental reporter Kevin Carmody that documented the labor exploitation and human cost of illegal asbestos removal in our state, our city chose to act. Though it has long been a requirement of state and federal law that building owners of subject properties perform an asbestos inspection before the start of any demolition or renovation work, these reviews seldom took place. Our ordinance was one of the first in the state to require the permit applicants provide proof of a survey before the city can grant a permit. While subsequent state law also requires that municipalities collect an indication from the applicant that a survey has been performed, our ordinance goes further and requires actual evidence of the survey be provided to the building official. Additionally, it is written in a way that disallows the controversial use of MSDS SDS sheets reviews by architects as a so-called survey alternative. Our current ordinance also provides a statutory commitment by the city to its workers that asbestos surveys are to be performed at the onset of any purchase or lease of a building. Additionally, it provides for locally imposed penalties on persons found working without a survey. And it also contains an absolute prohibition on the installation of new asbestos-containing materials in buildings. None of these provisions are found in the replacement language of the draft LDC. Instead, the draft contains only a single vague sentence stating that, quote, all development must comply with applicable provisions of the state asbestos program. By contrast, current code clearly lays out the responsibilities not only of permit applicants, but also of the city. This is important, as a 2017 city audit found that DSD appears to have no process to verify that a survey has been completed by a competent person in line with current city code and state law. This audit also found required survey evidence missing from permits examined in their sample set. At a time when our city is considering zoning changes which have large implications for redevelopment, we need to strengthen and expand existing worker protections, not weaken them. These are hazards developers generally don't want to know about, contractors often don't care about, and workers, especially younger ones, are completely unaware of. As you work to plan our city's futures, please do not forget about protections for the people who will actually be building it. I hope you've taken the time to read the letters I've sent you, and I ask that you please retain the codes from our existing survey ordinance in the new LDC. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Esther from Lafayette Avenue. And then Lauren Ross. Ma'am, you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to get it all in time. My name is Esther Haidar. I live in the Cherrywood neighborhood. I've lived there for approximately 35 years. We recognize the greater need for affordable housing, as well as the idea that climate change is improved or helped by having denser homes. Unfortunately, I think this current code is not the solution and doesn't address those issues. I think the code needs to have greater input from the directly from neighborhoods that are affected by the code. And there needs to be better consideration of those neighborhoods that are impacted. For example, in my neighborhood, we currently have a lot of congestions and a lot of overflow parking. We support people's clinics. There's UT buildings in the areas. There's businesses, Hoover's, Thunderbird, all of those child care facilities. all those individuals are already parking into the neighborhood. With the use of the transition zones and greater units, the situation is going to be worse. And I would also note that in that particular neighborhood, there's no sidewalks. So everyone is already walking in the streets to try to get to their cars and move around and coming and going. So again, I think it's important to allow for greater flexibility or re-examine these areas to make it more suitable for the particular neighborhoods. I also believe the transition zones are too deep. Again, Cherrywood is a particularly small area, and at least where I live, with the transition zones around it and corridors and the number of lots and areas that you can go in. It's basically a tiny little island that's left of the neighborhood, and it's pretty much wiped out. So I think, again, a closer look to these particular situations is well warranted. I understand that there's also an effort to allow more unrelated individuals to live into the housings, I believe, into the individual units. I believe that should be also looked at, because as you have more unrelated individuals, it's only likely that each of those individuals will have their own individual car, as opposed to a family or a spouse or couples who might share one particular car. Again, I think the idea of increasing the amount of parking spaces required by the unit would help a lot, as well as reducing the transition zone. And even if it's not 2 parking spaces to each unit, it's currently, I understand, 1-to-1, even if you were to increase it to 1.5 or 1.8, so that there's only a couple of cars that are crammed onto the already congested streets. I would also note that the building of these larger units within the neighborhood is going to result in the removal of more canopy and tree and green space. I appreciate the fact that the developers can put to a fund to put trees and what have you in parks fund, but I would appreciate it being a neighborhood that's directly impacted by the density changes, that perhaps the requirement should be that the trees and green spaces be dedicated back into the neighborhood. So I appreciate your time on this, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Lauren Ross. Ma'am, you'll have 3 minutes, so you'll have to go through it fast. Sorry we couldn't accommodate you yesterday. We had sort of a little misunderstanding. But if you'll stick around, we'll try to have questions once we get into the amendments.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to go as fast as I can and maybe skip a lot of these slides. I was asked by Commissioner Yanis Polito to come and talk about the relationship between flooding and impervious cover and why there are concerns in the community around the proposed increases in impervious cover associated with the code changes. My name is Lauren Ross. I'm a civil engineer licensed in the state of Texas, and I've been doing flood control and urban planning for flooding since 1978. I'm going to skip over these slides. Maybe the one point is to show that we have an increasing frequency and consequences associated with Austin's flooding recently. And I want to make sure that I'm not trying to just limit Austin's flooding problems to specifically impervious cover. We know that we have increasing climate instability that's leading to torrential rains, and that the standards for rainfall in Austin have just recently been increased to accommodate this with the Atlas 14 revisions. We also know that we get floods upstream from the Colorado River, and those floods are not affected by impervious cover. But development and impervious cover do absolutely contribute to flooding. The myth that you can increase impervious cover without flooding is not true. The fact is that we have a long-standing relationship that clearly links increases in impervious cover and flooding. The city's Austin Drainage Criteria Manual recognizes that. I won't read this to you, but it's basically saying we know that urban development affects the rate of runoff. And in this section, it describes that in urban development as grading, paving, streets, drives, parking lots, and sidewalks, all the kinds of things that are captured in the measurement of impervious cover. This is a graph that shows the increase. It's a theoretical graph. It shows the increase in the peak runoff. The red is post-development. The blue line is the pre-development or undevelopment hydrograph. This is how much runoff is happening as a function of time. And you can see that there's a much higher peak when you have development compared to the natural conditions. I did some calculations to compare undeveloped conditions, 45% impervious cover, which is the red bar, and 65% impervious cover, which is the green bar. This is cubic feet per second. The left set of bars is the 2-year storm, and the right set of bars is the 100-year storm. And you can see for the 100-year storm, as you increase impervious cover, you get more peak runoff. That is one of the factors that contributes to flooding, is the fact that that green bar is higher than the red bar and significantly higher than the blue bar.
All right, so we're going to have to ask you to pick up sort of later when we ask questions.
Okay, do you know how long that will be?
We're going to try to take those amendments first, the impervious cover amendments. No. We'll ask questions during the amendments. So
can you tell me, is that going to be like 30 minutes or 2 hours?
it's going to be under 30 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. Okay, those are all the speakers. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right, so we're going to jump right in. Commissioners, you're going to have to help me.
Chair?
Yes.
I looked back at our rules that we had set early on and just kind of wanted to remind everyone, I don't think we've been quite adhering to these. It looks like what we landed on were amendments. The amendment motioner gets 2 minutes. Each question person of 4 gets 2 minutes, and then there's 4 for 2 for 4 and 2 for against for amendments. And I think everything here are amendments. I don't think we've been adhering to this.
So the amendments that you're referring to are the amendments to the original motion. I know this is, semantics, but not quite what you described. So that is true for amendments in the second tier, but not for the first tier. So the first tier is 5 minutes of questions, meaning back and forth, and then 3 minutes for making the motion, speaking to the motion, and then 2 minutes afterwards. I will agree with you that we haven't been following that, and I will. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I'll share that with you. We'll go over that. Okay. All right. Any other comments before we start? If not, if we can go back to the impervious cover amendment that we skipped over, and maybe if Thompson or Shaw can help me get to the other ones too after that are maybe hidden in another working group amendment. Let's see. Let me see if I can find the 2 that we skipped.
It's in residential under the heading impervious cover.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start with that, folks. It's number 4 and 35. Is that correct? Did we already split those up yesterday?
We did, and I believe we were starting with 35.
Starting with 35. Thank you for reminding me about that. Did we get through approving any amendments?
We did. We removed the or 2250 square feet, whichever is greater, and we edited the last sentence to read establish rules that grandfather in the current allocation period, and removed all the following text.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Kenny. That was a Seeger Schneider, and that passed 13-0, so that's sort of what we'll pick off. So we'll pick up from there. This is a Kenny Shea amendment. Let's go ahead and have you make the motion again, Commissioner Kenny.
So the motion is the title is impervious cover reduction for single units. It says reduce impervious cover for single units in all zones, and it should read where it is 45%, down to 40%, parentheses, rebounds to 45% with ADU duplex or other 2-unit form. Establish rules that grandfather in current allocation.
Okay. Commissioner Shea, are you still seconding? All right. So now we'll go to questions. I would recommend if there's someone here that is not doesn't have a lot of questions about impervious cover might ask a question to Lauren to continue her presentation. If not, feel free to ask other questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Thompson.
Can you tell us some more about impervious cover?
Thank you. I think when I started, I forgot to say that I really do greatly appreciate your time and energy here on behalf of our community. And I'm going to make this as quick as possible because I know you have a lot of important things to consider. So this chart shows that for both the 2-year storm and also for the extreme storms of a 100-year return interval, that we do have a significant increase in impervious cover. These numbers are based on calculations that I did using City of Austin drainage criteria methods for a 3-acre tract. As you add up tract after tract after tract, these differences are going to be compounded.
Lauren, I've been advised to tell you to not continue your presentation, but answer the question. And if you choose to answer your question in the form of the presentation, that's okay. But I'm just going to give you that advice.
So, I'm sorry, I don't know the rules, so somebody's going to have to help me navigate this.
Can you tell me something about myths of Austin's drainage standards?
Yeah, thank you. So another common myth is that we have regulations in place that will solve the increases in flooding associated with impervious cover. And the truth is that our drainage standards do not solve flooding problems. And the reason that they don't solve flooding problems is because they consider the peak flow. You have to match the peak flow in the drainage standards, but they don't address increases in the runoff volume. And this is a chart that's similar to the one before that shows that with increasing impervious cover, you have increasing runoff volume. And let me try to explain why that makes a difference. So this chart basically illustrates the standard that developers meet when they match the peak flow. So the tie curve is the flow that comes off a site when you add impervious cover. The lower curve is the flow that came off as a function of time in an undeveloped condition. And the City of Austin says you have to add a detention basin to get that dashed line effect, right? That dashed line accommodates the higher volume that's coming off the site. And so what happens is, this is how I describe it. Before urbanization, that hydroglyph came up and it kind of kissed the peak amount and then it dropped back down, right? It comes up and it just touches, just barely kisses that peak amount, and then it drops back down. What Austin drainage standards require is that you go up to that pre-development peak, but then you hang there for hours, right? There's that dashed line is a function of time. You're hanging there for hours. And so instead of the flow kind of taking turns in the stream, like coming up, peaking, moving out, coming up, and then the next site arrives and moving out, instead everybody's hanging there in the stream with this extended detention because we're trying to get all the water through the stream that would have been soaked up into the soil, except for the fact that you've got impervious cover. So even though we have requirements and drainage standards on the books that say no more peak flow than was present before you put your own development on, and those standards actually say whatever was, if there was already development on the site that didn't have to take care of it, you don't even have to address that. But they don't, no more peak flow, but they allow that increase in volume. And so what happens is that you have those floodwaters stacking up in the creek and backing up into people's houses, and there's nothing in Austin's water quality standards or our drainage requirements that address that. I think something else that people are saying, a myth, is that we have water quality standards that will help to solve our flooding problems. This is the half-inch plus sedimentation filtration basins or other kinds of stormwater solutions that do capture some of the stormwater, but it's not nearly enough. They don't completely address that increase in runoff volume. And I have this chart to help me see if I can help you understand the difference. So
So we're going to see if there's another commissioner that has a question,
okay,
and I'm going to try not to do.
This is my last slide.
Okay, try not to do the entire presentation. Okay, Commissioner Kenny. Okay.
So I wanted to back up to the slide that you had comparing 0 to 45 to 65, and then combine this with the curve graphs that you showed. So it looks like the bulk of the damage, there's more damage that occurs between 0 and 45 than there is between 45 and 65.
Yeah.
And if we can go back to that curve graph. So,
this one here.
So today and, under the current code, we don't require any runoff water quality, stormwater detention at all for the single-family sites that are allocated to 45% or even 65% for the small lots. So this graph would lead me to believe that because the bulk of the damage is done from 0 to 45, that it would be preferable to have a 60% width detention basin compared to a 45% with no controls at all.
You're not going to solve this. You're not going to solve the flooding problem because of, even with that detention, you're
Right.
still going to be stacking up water in the stream.
But my question isn't about solving the problem. I'm asking which is worse for flooding and water quality, a 45% with no controls or a 60% site with controls?
It somewhat depends on where you are in the watershed, but the bottom line is that you can go ahead and implement detention even with 65% with controls, and you are not going to reduce the flooding back to the pre-developed or even the 45% condition.
So I want to hone in on that last statement. So a 65% site with controls is going to have inferior runoff to a 45% site with no controls?
It depends. It depends on where you are in the watershed.
Because sorry.
Because if you
hold on.
sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'm sorry you don't have this chart, but everybody else up here has this chart. And you'll see that for the equivalent zones in the commercial zones, everybody either has the same IC. There's some sites that go down 0.1. There's some sites that go up 0.1. So the real change that we're talking about in Austin is the transition zones, where we have sites that are currently allowed 45% and would go up to 50 under the proposed R4 or 60 under the proposed RM1. But right now, those 45% sites that are largely already developed have no controls at all. And we get a lot of complaints here, and I get emails from people saying flooding is happening now, and then I look at their neighborhood, it's all SF3, so it's all 45%. So we're not talking about greenfield going to 65. We're talking about uncontrolled 45 going to maybe some controlled regime of 50 or 60. So that's really the question that's before this body today. So do you have anything else you want to elaborate on that?
If you don't address the increase in the flow volume as well as the peak flow, you're going to put in detention that will actually make the problem worse, better for some people, but worse for other people downstream.
Okay.
Because you're going to because that detention is going to do what I said. It's going to stack up that flow, and somebody's going to end up with more flow downstream than they did if you let that peak run, higher peak, but get it out. Okay. So for some people, you're going to make the problem worse.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Yanis Pulido.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. I have a question about the water quality control and so requiring residential to recapture. So a lot of our watersheds empty into the river or into Lady Bird Lake. Some we see a lot of flow downstream. Particularly, I'm thinking of people affected by Onion Creek and Williamson Creek. Can you speak to what on-site that water quality control, those stricter standards, would do in those scenarios?
The slide that I had, maybe we can put it back up there for just a minute. Yep, sorry, here we go. So the left two bars are the runoff volume increases associated with an increase in impervious cover. That set of 4 bars in the middle is the difference. So that's in inches how much additional additional runoff you're getting from a 2-year, that's blue, 10-year is red, 25-year is green, and purple is 100-year. And you can see those numbers in terms of inches of runoff range from 2.8 to 4.5 inches. Our water quality volumes are a half an inch to 1.77 inches if you're in the Barton Springs zone for 65% impervious cover. And you can see that none of those water quality controls are actually capturing the increase in the runoff volume for any of those storms, not the 2-year storm and not the 100-year storm. So the water quality capture depths by themselves are not going to address this increase in the runoff volume.
Any other follow-ups?
Thanks. I think we'll let you know if we have any more questions for you. Can I talk to staff, please?
Thank you.
So a couple of questions for y'all. So, the most walkable places on Earth for the most part, when you're not walking in a forest, of course, are very, high impervious cover rates. You go around Europe, you go around the major cities across America. Just looking at the new code and trying to compare, sprawl that doesn't have any water detention, water quality. Can you guys help walk me through, what are the side effects of sprawl that don't have those safeguards versus the transition zones that we're talking about that do have shared walls, shared roofs? Impervious cover doesn't care if it covers 1 home or 4 homes or 5 homes, and so impervious cover can be used to a greater efficiency. And so can you help walk me through the efficiencies that we're talking about here?
Sure. Matt Holland, Watershed Protection. So I think you're speaking to the sort of per capita impacts of impervious cover potentially. So we do focus on impervious covers kind of from a bird's eye view or aerial view. And so whether it's very tall or 1 story or what have you, it doesn't matter. So that is an important aspect of talking about density, is it does provide a way to have fewer impacts per unit or per capita.
And can you walk us through the greenfield requirements that we're talking about now on corridors and kind of how it is today versus what we're looking at in the new code?
Sure. Oh, okay. So a cornerstone of our proposal to reduce flood risk per the City Council direction is to provide greenfield flood management. And so currently a commercial property or multifamily property that redevelops that has existing impervious cover in place doesn't have to count that toward its flood solutions when it redevelops. And so that's a major gap. And so we're actually asking that projects would come back and actually show that they're actually accounting for that full amount of impervious cover when they redevelop. So we actually just today did some calculations. There's about 10,000 acres of impervious cover in town that currently do not have detention on them. There's no flood mitigation. These are older properties. It's a citywide. And that's strongly contrasted with a 350-acre increase in impervious cover entitlements. So it's a pretty big delta, a pretty big ratio. We think so. We're hopeful that when we were talking earlier in more higher level terms of like how that greenfield's impact is going to be, this is actually putting some numbers to that. So we basically have it was like 25 or 30 times higher amount of area that's going to be subject to this new
That's great.
proposal.
Yeah. Last question. So as I understand, we're adding quite a bit of capacity. We're the fastest growing city in the United States, the large cities, and we're predicted to stay as such. And we're adding around 400,000 units of capacity, but your modeling shows just a slight uptick in a couple of watersheds, but for the most part, no change. Can you walk through that?
Sure. We did a thorough impervious cover analysis. Council did want us to look at all different watersheds and citywide and hold the line on impervious cover with all these new units and with the missing middle mandate as well. We came in just above the current level of entitlements, and so that we showed an overall increase of 0.2% citywide. Theoretically, this is like everybody completely maxed out. There's a whole bunch of caveats to go with that, but basically, we feel like that was coming in extremely close to effectively zero, and only 2 watersheds exceeded 1% in increase in entitlements.
Thanks for all of your work. Thank you.
Okay, don't go too far. I have a quick question. If you can pull up my slides. Matt, I was just hoping, Matt or Kevin, if you can comment on these slides. So I spent a good portion of today trying to recreate Dr. Ross's chart there, and I wasn't able to. But essentially what this chart does is looks at different size lots from 2,500 all the way to 10 acres and assumes that they're 2-to-1 configurations, so they're a rectangular lot, and that the flows are from one corner diagonally across to the other corner toward the street. And let's go to the next one, which is really what we're trying to compare to be able to make a decision today. And let's zoom in there so we can see the numbers. Zoom into the yellow at the top left. So really what we're looking at is if a lot is sloping at 2%, if we're going from 45% to 60%, the peak flows are changing by 2%. That's the change that I saw. I wasn't able to recreate what Dr. Ross was sharing. Then the next column over is lot slopes that are at 5%, and then others that are at 10%. And if we go back, just FYI for whoever's interested, I can share these. It goes from 2,500 square feet. So keep scrolling. There you go. 2,500, 5,000, 7,000, and the numbers are fairly consistent. I mean, the change between 45% to 60% is very, very small. So if Matt or Kevin, if you comment on what you see here compared to what you see with Dr. Ross, and how does that affect the decision we're making today?
I think, actually, going back to Dr. Ross's slides, I think that's full disclosure. I used to work with Dr. Ross. You consider her a mentor and good friend, so just wanted to put that out there.
Sure.
So for full disclosure, she's actually making cases we make in our department all the time about the importance of flood management and doing these things, and we're absolutely not up here to say impervious cover and flooding or impervious cover and peak flows or runoff volumes aren't related. They're absolutely, it's pretty obviously proven that that's true. I think where I would want to zoom in on some of her slides, but we were talking about that peak hydrograph of the urbanized area. We're not actually taking it from undeveloped all the way to, actually Mr. Kinney I think was making this point too, we're not taking it from undeveloped all the way up to 65 or whatever it is. When you look at the numbers in our analysis, we're talking about areas that are just like barely tweaking the top of that hydrograph, going up a little or down a little. And when I talk about large areas being subject to this new greenfields management proposal, that's hopefully going to be tamping that down, even as we're having a little bit of missing middle, pushing it up a little bit, because the ratio in the areas of under study here are favorable in terms of what we're talking about. But anyway, I think this makes sense what you've got up on the screen.
And if I could reinforce the point that you just made about large areas, if we zoom in a little bit more, I want to show the difference that the area makes. So if you look at, go ahead and zoom in a little bit more. There you go. So 2,500. If we look at, say, the 60%, where it says 0.47, and then the 5,000 square foot lot jumps up to 0.9. So if the area is doubled, roughly the flows are doubled. The increase in area is very sensitive, right? So you get that much more flows if the areas are more. If we're tackling the large areas with this new code, we're making a major improvement, as opposed to when we're increasing some of these transition areas from 45% to 60%. That's a negligible increase, and that's the way I see it.
Kevin Chunk, Floodplain Administrator. So I just want to acknowledge certainly the points that Dr. Ross was making, that impervious cover does affect runoff, is true. And that's why our existing regulations require some level of detention. Not volumetric detention, as you talked about, but that's why we like a peak flow detention. With the data we're seeing here, that I think represents an actual lot, maybe lot size, hypothetical, but it's still a typical lot size. I think we're seeing that the data that you're showing here shows that, yes, there is an increase, but it's very minor increase, and then that's offset by this, what Matt was saying, so this larger area where we're going to get some detention where we have nothing now.
And I'll just say I recognize Dr. Ross's credentials too. I haven't looked at the volume. I've only looked at the flows, and so I don't know how the flows impact it. I don't know how the volume impacts it. I would be curious to hear, because there was one of the slides that Dr. Ross showed about, I'm going to run out of time here, so you won't have a chance to answer my question, but one of the slides that showed Austin regulations are not effective. I'm curious to know what kind of regulations are effective.
I mean, I think one of our slides was
I'm
that.
sorry, I ran out of time. So.
Okay, sorry about that.
Commissioner Seeger, then Azar.
Chair, Commission Liaison Andrew, I believe Q&A is exceeded.
What did we say? 4?
Chair?
I was just trying to continue the conversation.
Chair, I just want to make a point of information that the current amendment that we're considering is for the reduction in IC, and we have a couple more that are actually related to increases in IC, so there will be more opportunities to ask questions related to that.
So we have two options. We can either do that, or we can have a motion to change the rules if we think we want more time. I'm open to either one. Commissioner Seeger?
I'd like to make a motion that we suspend the rules and continue for 10 minutes on this discussion line.
10 minutes total. That's two folks. That's 2 more questions.
Okay, let's go 20 minutes if we have 4 people.
4 more
let's
questions.
Let's put a maximum.
Can we do 4 more questions and not 20 minutes?
Sure.
4 more questions. Okay. Motion by Seeger. Second by Azar. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay. All right. That motion passes.
Chair, what was the count on that? You need a supermajority to suspend the rule?
The count was 10-1. 11-1. Is that correct? There was 1 opposed? Anderson, were you opposed? Oh, I didn't see your hand. Schneider's not here. So was it 12-0? Was there anyone opposed? No. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. All right. Next question, Commissioner Seeger, then Azar.
I don't have a question. I was going to ask that the answer to your question continued because it was on a really important line.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
So her slide stated that the current regulations do not solve flood problems. And I would agree with that the current regulations hold the line at the current level of flooding. It's not allowed to increase flooding, yet there's no requirement in the current code that requires a site to decrease the water coming off the site. That is the purpose of the greenfields requirement, such that a site that has no detention now would then reduce the level of flooding of runoff that's coming off that site when it gets redeveloped.
Commissioner Seeger, did you have any follow-ups?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Azar?
So I'm trying to understand the amendments in hand. I feel like we've gotten a little sidetracked. We're litigating IC's effect on localized flooding. So I want to move away from that for a second. I'm just trying to understand. So I think the first thing that you all explained is apparently the way we have done this now is that we've shifted our impervious cover from certain places to another. So our overall increase, as you mentioned, I think is 0.2 across. It's essentially that in some places our impervious cover has increased, in some places it's reduced. Like on the corridors, we're seeing a major reduction. Is that correct? Is my assumption correct?
Yes. There are, I wouldn't say there's any major decreases or major increases, but they do level out.
And overall, there's a small marginal increase.
Mostly it's all mostly lateral changes, very similar to today's code.
Okay, that helps. So then I'm going to ask, I guess, what we're doing here is we're reducing in some places and increasing in other. So I'll start off by saying, so we went in the transition zones from 45 to 50. Can you explain what impact that might have, that 5% increase? What impact would that look like in the overall capacity, considering also we're talking about corridors where impervious cover might go down?
Sure. And actually, we did an analysis last year or a year and a half ago showing the impacts on an actual local flood drainage area down in South Austin in the Del Curto area. And so we showed what would happen if you had infill development for a neighborhood that went from 31% current impervious cover up to 47% impervious cover. And basically we were seeing extremely modest impacts in that system. And it's, each one's going to vary some, but we were seeing relatively small. Again, you're spreading out this water over. There are increases, of course, mathematically, but it doesn't always add up to these larger increases. And we're happy to share that study with the community.
I think that would be helpful. And then I guess my question here is, we're saying in certain cases you could move from 50 to 60 potentially. We haven't decided what that gap is. What impact would that have? So I don't know if I'm sure you cannot be able to, but essentially we're saying revise R4 impervious cover to be graduated by unit count. So keep IC at R2's 45% for 1 to 2 units, and consider increasing IC to greater than 50 under bonus configuration. So when we go above that 50, what does that look like, or what would that mean?
Sure. Anytime you raise it, you're going to get more runoff. You're going to have incrementally more runoff. You are seeing kind of a flattening. You can see that in Dr. Ross's data. As it goes up, it doesn't just keep skyrocketing up, but it is going to increase. Those lots are also mixed in with street right of way and some other things that aren't changing. So it's a pretty complex dynamic in terms of you're not going to have an area go from 45 all the way up to 60 in one shot. But yes, you are going to have some more runoff. In the 60% are in one category. You would have to have an engineer oversee that project and certify that the water is going to actually proceed off-site successfully. But we're not requiring flood detention on those. Those are very, very small sites, and those would not be required to provide flood detention.
And then I guess the other amendment was we're going down to 45% for a single unit. So then would we kind of see the similar aspect here where we're going down on certain properties first? So for single family, we'd go down. For R4, if you're building to the maximum bonus, you would go above 50. So could we reasonably expect, and I know you don't have the modeling in front of you, could we reasonably expect that it would even out in a similar way?
So this is the proposal on the table, that you would actually reduce it from 45 to 40 in some cases. Then sure, I mean, to the extent that it hangs in there and it's the same, you're going to have the same runoff. It would just depend on how that shook out in the end in terms of the long-term development pattern.
Okay. This is really helpful, and I'm quickly going to go over one. So when you said 0.2% increase city-wise, if everyone is max, you're saying if we build to full entitlements for all of the entitlements that we're offering. Is that correct?
Right. We're just comparing today's maximum entitlements with tomorrow's maximum entitlements under the code. And we don't expect either of those things to actually happen, but those are theoretical things that are important to compare because it shows whether or not we're blowing past it or going under or what have you.
So we're going max to max. And then one last quick question. You said in 2 watersheds it went above 1. Can you say what those 2 watersheds?
Sure. Johnson Creek and Waller Creek. And it was just a hair over 1% in each case. We can get that data here in a second if you want it.
That would be
and
really...
we just uploaded that study today to the Land Development Code website. And so the community can download that document and look at all the watersheds across town.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Any other questions, Commissioner Shaw? And then we have one more after that, Leighton Burwell.
So specific to these 2 amendments, but we also have some others that speak to process. And I know you guys are drawing that bright line at once you exceed 50%, you want the engineer to provide, the certification but it doesn't sound you're actually going to require site controls up to 60. So my question is, we are trying to make limited site plan process match up with the RM1 and expedited so they don't have to have that engineering review. What are the risks if we allow that all the way up to 60 to accommodate all the transition area zones to move through under an expedited process without an engineer's study and you guys looking at that, just like the less than 50? What are the risks? And I mean, can we do that to expedite housing? But what are the risks to the watershed that we might be missing out on?
Sure, and there's not going to be some sort of magical line where, oh boy, if you went to 53 or 54 or whatever, then that's when you need it. I mean, we came in with a staff recommendation that said the 50% level really was very similar to a 45% product. It sounded like from testing that was really necessary to make those things work out in a design, from a design standpoint. We felt like we could live with that. We needed to draw a bright line on that at some point to ask for engineering support, and so staff believed that 60%, just distinguishing between R4 and RM1 was an effective way to do that, to make sure that somebody was there to oversee the design to make sure that water proceeded off-site successfully.
So I guess, again, I'll ask, what if our recommendation here is to push that out to allow for, I mean, I know there's not a magic number, but I think the community wants to know what the risks are, because, I mean, we really think there's value in asking for that expedited review.
I see. Well, I mean, in the end, we've also talked about the plumbing code and some other things that are going to kick in. You can't flood your neighbors. To the extent that you're not having that oversight during the site plan process, there would be an opportunity for things to go sideways potentially. So that's the idea. There probably won't be a lot of projects that are causing problems, but it's a judgment call. When to have that kick in, and we felt that 60% versus the 50 was the place to draw that. I mean, so in other words, I mean, the more supervision you have, the more expensive it is, and the more care you're going to have in the oversight and design of that. So it's you're balancing those two things.
Commissioner Layton-Burwell.
Thank you. So just to clarify, in the urban core, like along corridors and in transition zones, will on-site detention be required for any redevelopment, or will there still be in lieu of fee that could be paid?
The answer is both. It depends on the size of the property. Our proposal is to put into the drainage criteria manual a threshold of 1/2 of an acre, such that if a project were less than half an acre, that they could automatically participate in the Regional Stormwater Management Program, RSMP. And then I could go into more detail. It's not just a payment automatically, but they would not have to build an on-site pond. And anything larger than that, which constitutes about 90% of the area of these projects affected. So to be really clear, letting off the hook these half-acre and less sites is on an aerial extent. Not we think it's a really effective way of administering this program. And so basically, most of the larger sites would have to do something potentially on site if that was the right technical call. Every now and then you shouldn't actually use a detention pond. You need to let the water through. But on many sites larger than 0.5 acres, you would have a detention pond.
But there are a lot of sites currently on our corridors that are under half acre.
That's correct.
And so if you have 100 of those, that's 50 acres of runoff. That is where they're just paying a fee. But haven't you, in discussions that we've had with neighborhoods and that, said that the storm sewer structure that is serving those urban core areas is insufficiently sized to handle the runoff, and that there's not enough money in the world to essentially to pay for those things to upgrade the urban core storm sewer systems.
So we do believe that this new proposal is going to help with that because those small projects come in, they don't necessarily automatically pay. Our staff would work with their applicant, they would look in the area, and they would say, well, whoops, we're going to need to upgrade this inlet or extend this pipe, or make a payment or some combination. So we're actually going to be chipping away at the problems with these, even with the smallest sites. So they would, and again, the land area that the small sites add up to, yes, they do cumulatively add up to, in a certain circumstance, they could be a lot together. But honestly, when you look at the numbers, there are a lot of them, but their land area is very small, and from a watershed impact, drainage system impact, that matters. And we really want to look at the larger ones to use for the
We've seen cases of houses that have been converted to small offices, and they go from 45% to 70% impervious cover if they're LO or NO, and currently under the current code, with no controls at all. And there's been, and also essentially all they're doing is adding to flooding downstream. And of course we're in the Shoal Creek or the Hancock, but it serves Shoal Creek, so. We're doing our part to flood 10th Street in Lamar, it seems like, currently, and I don't see that there's any real relief from that.
Well, once again, we do believe this is going to make major forward progress because we're basically asking all new commercial projects to either contribute in one way or the other, as opposed to right now.
But your words were chipping away at it. So
sure.
These aren't wholesale. I mean, we're going to continue to have flooding issues in Austin, regardless of your efforts, it sounds like.
That's accurate. I mean, it's going to be a long-term lift to try to address all 1,100 miles of pipe. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, those were all the questions, commissioners. Now we have a motion on the table. Is there commissioners speaking against? Remember, this motion is number 35. We're asking for single units, reducing the impervious cover from 45 to 40.
Chair.
Yes.
If we're starting over, I just read the amendment. I didn't speak for it.
Go ahead. We'll have 3 minutes.
So I won't take 3 minutes. I'll just say that I think this does pair with other amendments. I'm excited about the plumbing code and other aspects, but as some of the charts that we saw earlier have shown, and a lot of the testimony that we have gotten from cases before this body, the unregulated 45% impervious cover is a major problem in this town. And there is major flooding because of the single-family development standards. So while I think, staff has spoken to the problems with putting detention ponds on individual sites, I think one thing that we can do, especially if we are considering increasing the impervious cover for these transition zones, as the draft does and as our amendments to do, is to at least chip away at the problem that single-family 45% impervious cover represents today in Austin. So I think this amendment is part of a package that makes impervious cover not be as much of just a straight giveaway. And I don't want to call it laziness, but because it's not an indictment of anyone personally, but there's a lot of stuff that we require for missing middle housing or multifamily housing that we don't require for single-family housing, just because it would be a pain to do it for single-family housing, and we think we can kind of get away with imposing that burden on multifamily housing, even though they might be actually imposing the same exact flood risk. And so what I like about this general approach of moving to a more unit-based impervious cover is it really makes our impervious cover kind of work for us as a city and look at what are our goals. Our goals are to provide affordable housing, provide dense housing near transit. Let's not just give that 45% away in all cases, or even as we have talked about, as we have amendments next and coming, say let's go ahead and bump RM1 to 60 and bump R4 to 50 just straight away, but let's look at the number of units that you're doing. Let's look at the amount of are you providing affordable housing? Are you paying into the Affordable Housing Fund? So I like this because it synchronizes the impervious cover regulations with our housing goals as a city.
Speaking against or neutral? Commissioner Shaw?
I'm just in the middle right now because I'm wondering, and I think we had some discussions how, just from a landowner perspective, how we might be limiting their ability to reach that 45, that they had at one point when they bought the house. And so I'm just something I'd like to mention. That's just a concern I have.
That was incorporated as an amendment.
Okay, could we?
There is the sentence that says establish rules that grandfather in current allocations.
Okay, so that is currently part of this amendment. Okay.
Yes, and just a reminder, we're only doing 35. We're not doing 4 yet.
Yeah, that was a Seeger-Schneider amendment that passed 13-0.
Okay, all right, then we've addressed it. Thank you.
But that was 24 hours ago, so. Speaking for or neutral or against? 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
So I'm going to speak for this. I think it really, as Commissioner Kenny spoke about it, it really balances out the increases we have on one side, and it also pushes to show our commitment that we are really, are concerned for flooding in areas. So by decreasing that gives the opportunity to go up on the others. The other thing I want to bring up, and this is to answer Commissioner Shaw, is also Commissioner Kenny and I was also talking about potentially another amendment of a site plan light opportunity for instance, a new single-family home, or even if it's a duplex or whatever. But if they did some type of super site plan light, that they could reach that 45 or potentially more. But it shows that their commitment, rather than just being able to get the outright 45 or whatever, that they're actually going to do something about their site to address that. It could be water gauge, it could be rainwater harvesting, but we finally put it back on the homeowners to show their commitment and actually do something good overall for the community as well. So I think that's the other thing that's going to come up. And so, Commissioner Shaw, that would be something we're bringing back to allow somebody to reach that 45, again, potentially more. Okay. So.
Any other speakers for or against? Commissioner Seeger?
I'm for. However, it seems to me that if you have 45% impervious cover today, and the rules change, and they take away some, and we take away that 0.5%, that aren't those property owners still entitled to the 45 as it exists today without having to do extraneous things that were not required in the past? So to keep what you have today, but yet for new development or extensive remodeling, go to 40%, that's fine. But if you have a 40%, if you have 45 today, I think you should be able to appeal or do something to start the grandfathering so it is locked in stone and you don't have to do anything else that you wouldn't be required today.
All right, that was 3 speakers for. Anyone against or neutral? If not, let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? That motion carries 12-0. Commissioners, I hope that the majority of your impervious cover questions are answered, that the rest of the impervious cover related amendments go a little bit faster than that. Do any commissioners still have questions for Dr. Ross? Because I know I told her 30 minutes, so I don't want to keep her here all night. Okay. Maybe? Well, not now, but when we take up the amendment. All right. Amendment number 4.
Yeah, I'm going to read this, and then I have some amended text on the end that I hope is going to speak to some of the work that Commissioner Shaw and I have been doing on site plan light, and I think will come up again. So the amendment is R4 impervious cover adjustment. Revise R4 impervious cover to be graduated by unit count. Keep IC at R2's 45% for 1 to 2 units. And actually, let's go ahead and revise that to, since we just passed that amendment, say keep IC at 40% for 1 unit 45% for 2 units, and then we can scratch that parenthetical since we already passed it. And consider increasing impervious cover to greater than 50% under bonus configurations to make bonus viable in more locations, subject, this is the new text, subject to appropriate additional review and on-site controls as determined by staff. So this asks staff to go take a look at this, figure out what the difference is between 50 and 60, and what is both feasible and appropriate to do without giving them direction on what exactly that is. I'll just speak to it and say that I think that by reducing the by right impervious cover and putting the additional impervious cover into the bonus, that we are really making the bonus more viable. And I wanted to note that AIA's feedback on R4 was that they thought it was improperly calibrated and, quote, it will be very hard to achieve 4 units, let alone the bonus, on small lots mapped R4 without additional impervious cover. So if we don't add impervious cover to R4, we're essentially writing off affordable units on these sites.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Shaw. Okay. Staff, does staff have any comments on this? We're going to do the same drill, staff, so if we can have a couple of staff members up here. Oh. Mm-hmm. R4, 1 unit at 40, 2 units at 45, and additional units consider more than 50%. Any thoughts?
So we've had a long-standing debate about using very small controls. So we're talking about, I'm sorry, this is just impervious cover straight out, no rain garden, rain tanks, et cetera, right?
It says additional review or on-site controls as appropriate as determined by staff. So if you determined that that was what you wanted to do, that would be consistent with this intent.
So we would take a look at this proposal and try to come back with a recommendation based on it? Is that?
You could come back and say to council, if you want to go over 50 and you want to go up to, say, 60, here's what we would recommend for those sites.
I see. Okay, so there's this big grayscale of from difficult to amazing when you do all these different things. So having something on there like a rain tank or what have you, and I personally have a couple of rain tanks, I love them. But they require maintenance and oversight, and you got to make sure that it's kind of functioning on the long haul. So I think we would be coming back to y'all with some suggestions. If you guys pass this, we would come back with suggestions talking about what that looks like, what the pros and cons are, and so forth. Is that the idea of what you were hoping for?
Well, we're done with it. So you
done.
You be going to council with it.
This would be,
and I will just point out the verbiage in the intent. This is that the purpose of the IC greater than 50% is that it's only available under the bonus configuration, and that it's to make the bonus more viable. So if what you suggest makes the bonus not viable, then that's not really living up to the intent. But you could also just come to the council and say we couldn't find a way to make it to do on-site controls that are viable. So Planning Commission's recommendation is not feasible.
Sure. Well, we're very happy to take a look at any kind of recommendation you want to provide for this. This is something we have studied on and off over time. It actually came up first under the mansion ordinance.
Okay.
Question?
Yeah.
Would the options offered to staff also just include fee in lieu? Is that
their discretion?
Okay.
Any other follow-ups? Commissioner Thompson? No?
Any questions?
Yeah.
So in order to do your assessment, it's pitching it back over to you. But let's say this, you do agree, but would that require the more expensive engineering analysis for that site for you guys to be able to make a call? Or could we create something simple that's more straightforward and not have to spend all that money to get, for these affordable units?
I would want to go back and talk with our whole team. We have looked at, actually, we made a presentation to the Board of Adjustment some time back where we looked at rainwater harvesting and what kind of ratios between roof sizes and rain tank sizes you'd need to actually function as a detention pond. So there's some interesting things we could probably look at for that.
Commissioner Shea?
I just want to follow up with that. I mean, the concern I have is, let's say you send them back and somehow now they have to spend thousands of dollars for somebody to draw up some plans when it could be as simple as, like you're saying, well, here's a tank, let's figure out some calculations. And the money's actually spent in implementing versus paying somebody to draw some stuff for it to get considered, to get bid, to get, it just keeps going on and on and on. So we are trying to keep things affordable. So let's try some simple solutions that are affordable that doesn't require all that additional oversight.
Sure. We appreciate that and would factor that into our recommendation.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Yanis Pulido, that's the last question.
Sorry, I just wanted to avoid the feedback. I would like to offer an amendment. Exactly as reads, but make the bonus viable in more locations subject to public review.
Okay. Is there a second? It's not a second. One last question. Any commissioners? Commissioner Hempel?
Question for the working group. Can you go over your conversations with AIA related to they wouldn't be able to, maybe I misheard this, they wouldn't be able to make R4 work unless they had more IC, and we're saying in this amendment that they would have to bonus configuration to get to the IC needed for them to do an R4? Am I hearing that right?
So the amendment reads for an excess of 50%. So one way that staff could come back and structure it would be to say for 3 to 4 units, you get the 50% that's in the current draft. But then if you do the bonus, you get more than that. The interesting thing about doing that is that you don't have to build all 8 units to take the bonus. You just have to build a unit if it's in a required on-site area, or pay a fee in lieu if it's not. So the interesting thing to me about this is it sets up a situation where maybe only 4 or 5 or 6 units are actually feasible, even with, say, 60%. But you take that bonus because you want that impervious cover, because it turns a 3-unit viable lot into a 6-unit viable lot.
Okay. And real quick, just to follow up with that, I mean, you said to make it unfeasible. The comment was unfeasible on the smaller R4 lots. So it's not that all R4s just doesn't work. It, of course, depends on the size of the lot. So I just want to clarify that nobody's saying it's impossible on all R4s, just the smaller ones.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, when I was doing modeling on that R2D bonus with an architect, what we saw was that on lots that you needed at least 55% to get 4 units on an interior lot that was only about 5,500 or 6,000 square feet. And once you started getting to 7,000 or 8,000 square feet, or you were on a corner, which would allow you to do it, because the deal is like everyone's still going to build parking for the next 10 years or so with this stuff. So they have to figure out it's the driveway that kills it. So if you're on a corner lot, you can have that driveway off the side street a lot of times. So yeah, it's the smaller lots. And when we did the data pool, what we found is that like 7/8 of the lots are between 5 and 10. So there's definitely a lot of lots that you'll definitely need the IC to make it work.
That was all the questions. Speaking against? Or neutral? Commissioner Yanis Pulido?
So my concern about this is just because all impervious cover is not created equal. I mean, it doesn't have the same impact. And I'm particularly concerned about bonus-prone areas that are older parts of town, and also parts of town on the east side where the infrastructure has been inadequate for a really long time, where creeks are paved and not open spaces, and where people are getting flooding all the time. One of my coworkers in Dove Springs flooded last week. It was not a 100-year event. It was regular rainfall. And what we keep hearing from folks in that area, you've heard Francisca Acuña, it wasn't her, but you've heard her and others talk about the fact that some of these areas, they live in low-lying areas, and the increased development around them has been higher up. Easton Park, Goodnight Ranch, a lot of these new developments, right, subdivisions that we continue to approve. And those new subdivisions have really nice new retention ponds. They have great on-site stuff. That helps them. It does not help the people necessarily downstream. And I think some of the centralization of a lot of our drainage is unfortunately in these bigger events, and as that water accumulates, actually makes it more dangerous for some people downstream. I understand why I didn't get a second for public review, because it throws a wrench in the whole expediting of all of this stuff. But when we expedite too much, some people die and people lose their property. And some people have lost their property 3 times in addition to losing people. And that's the people you hear about. You don't hear about the pets. So this is dear to me. I appreciate legal for trying to keep us on track. We do have LDC on our agenda, and we're talking about impervious cover, so I really appreciate being able to hear everything. But I just think we need to be considerate. I appreciate staff's work, but I think that we need the public to be able to weigh in, because their lived experience always sheds a light on stuff that we miss with just the data.
Speaking for? Or against? Or neutral? Okay, let's take a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? That motion carries 11-1. Commissioners, if there's no objection, I'd just like to continue moving on. We'll come back to process when we get to it, the impervious cover related amendments that are there. I just want to kind of get through these working groups if there's no objection.
No.
All right, where are we at, Commissioner Kinney?
Okay. Going back to non-residential, we passed 1, 3, and 6 last night. So I'm going to go back and revisit number 2. And I think both staff and I have had some opportunities to talk about this with AIA. So the amendment is to restore current code for ground floor height and corridor zones. The amendment says replace the 18-foot required height for activated ground floor, and I'm actually going to say consider replacing the 18-foot required height for activated ground floors in MS zones, return to the 12-foot current minimum and current code for corridor mixed-use zones with an activated ground floor. So I talked to AIA about this, and what they indicated was that right now what we're seeing is that with the 12-foot requirement, what we're getting built is 15-foot, but that they appreciate the flexibility of if you have like a slope side or something like that, or you're trying to get another floor in. The feedback that we've gotten is that for especially more like national chains, that they might be looking for a certain retail space configuration. So the consensus that I got from talking to architects today was that 15 or 16 wouldn't be terrible, because that's usually what they produce today, but they appreciated the flexibility of having it be only 12. That's it.
Okay. All right. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Thompson. Staff? I know we went over this yesterday a little bit, so we don't have to get into this again, unless you'd like to.
Yeah. Oh, Peter Parr, consultant with the staff. Only that I think as discussed last night, the 18 feet was recommendation from some other architects, and I think staff is not opposed to reducing what the maximum height to the bottom of the structure would be. As we discussed last night, the overall height of the building was increased to 65 from 60, so our recommendation would be then also to reduce the overall height and really keep it within would essentially be providing for a 4/1 construction, but a lower first floor as well as a lower overall height.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Questions? Commissioner Leighton Burwell?
Well, this may be for the work group, but just to clarify, are we talking floor-to-floor height? Are we talking to the underside of bar joists? Are we talking to the inside of the wide flange beams? What, are we talking to a suspended ceiling below that? What are you defining here? Because anytime you're trying to legislate architecture, good luck.
Right, which is precisely why some folks are saying have the flexibility of the 12 and let the architecture dictate more. I believe the standard that's in draft code is to bottom of structures. Is that correct? Okay. So, and one of the things the architects expressed to me today was that sometimes you want to put in a drop ceiling, sometimes you want to not for your mechanical, and so that the AIA recommendation on this is to return it to the current 12 and just leave it as is.
Question. I'm not clear on that answer. Thank you, Commissioner, for bringing that up. So staff, can you walk us through what that looks like? Like, where is that measurement? Sure, exactly. But are we talking to the ceiling of the upper floor? Are we talking the bottom of the ceiling? Are we talking the drop floor?
What is the ceiling in
Right.
here? Is it that one or that one?
Staff, can you walk us through that? What is the exact answer here? What is the height? Are we talking clear space? Are we talking...
So the definition that we have in the definition section for this is height from finished floor to finished ceiling of primary rooms on the ground floor, not including secondary rooms such as bathrooms, closets, utility rooms, and storage spaces.
So when we have 18, the idea was to go all the way to 18? Or is there a new definition that goes with 18?
I think that this definition may have been adapted from floor to ceiling, which was what it was in draft 3, and not appropriately calibrated for the 18, because it's really intended to be to the bottom of the structural floor plate of the next floor up, and then the ceiling would be, if there was a ceiling, it'd be suspended below that, as well as ductwork and all of that. So it's really intended to be the floor plate of the piece above. This definition does not match that right now, so I will make a note that that's something that staff recommends we change.
Thank you.
And I'll just note that it says return in the intent language, Commissioner Anderson. Just to repeat it, replace the 18-foot required height for activated ground floors and MS zones, return to the 12-foot current or minimum, and so it's not a maximum, it's just a minimum in current code. So it would be just returning what's in subchapter E right now, however it's measured. It's not, some people think it's not broke, so why are we messing with it?
Can I ask a question?
Did I see another hand here?
I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead. Azar and then Shaw.
But wait, if I ask a question, I think I'm the last person who can ask a question.
Yes. Well, no, there's Azar and then Shaw. So we have 2 spots.
Okay. So I think I understand. We're essentially saying return to the 12-foot. Does it make sense to just get rid of that first part, replace the 18-foot? Because I think there's some confusion on where the calculation is. I think the intent would really be return to that 12-foot minimum, however you measure it. So we're going back to what it is.
Back to the height and back to the definition is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to understand. I guess my question to Commissioner Kenny is, does that sound reasonable, or does that not get to the intent?
My reading is that doesn't change the meaning at all. So if some people feel that's more clear, that's fine. I don't think it changes anything.
So I'll make a suggestion for an amendment and just cut those first 2 lines and say return to the 12. So restore current code for ground floor height and corridor zones. Return to the 12-foot minimum current code for corridor mixed-use zones with an activated ground floor. And staff, do you have something to say on that? I feel like I'm getting some.
Just that I think staff would be comfortable reducing it from 18, as Peter mentioned, and 15 is something we'd be comfortable with. Not as low as 12.
And I guess that depends on how we're measuring it, correct?
Yeah, 15 bottom of structure.
Yes. And just a note, part of the reason that we would like to increase it from 12 to 15 is in today's code, we don't have a zone that requires this pedestrian-oriented activity or ground floor retail outside of downtown. It's not as common as the MS zones would be in the proposed code, and we want to make sure that those retail spaces are adequately equipped to be viable retail, and that they're not shrunken down to get a more generous height for other floors. We want to make sure that that retail on the ground is actually engaging the streetscape. That's the intent of that 15 or 18 foot ceiling, or to the floor, to the structure, and then the ceiling could come down below that.
So I have this is so confusing. So can I just say return to the 12-foot minimum floor to ceiling in current code?
I don't believe it's ceiling in current code. I do believe it's bottom of structure, which if there was a ceiling that came below that, it would mean that it could be an 8-foot ceiling or a 9-foot ceiling, and the bottom of structure would be the 12. Bottom of structure is what we were advised from architects during our public testing as the technical, the architectural standard for measuring, and by the ceiling is such a variable height that it's very difficult to inspect that. Additionally, a lot of retail spaces are not finished out until it's actually rented, and then the actual renter finishes out the space and includes the ceiling. And so it would be very difficult to inspect a space to a ceiling.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. I'm sorry, just got you short to go back to Commissioner Kennedy to say, if we say 15 to bottom of structure, does that get to the same intent or not? I feel like the confusion here is really we're measuring it in two different ways. It's not that we're disagreeing on the height.
The feedback I got was that they're basically doing 15 today. They appreciate the flexibility of 12.
To the bottom of structure.
To the bottom of structure.
To the bottom of structure. Okay, I'm taking back my amendment.
Okay, all right. Okay, so regulating architecture.
Yeah.
Leighton Burwell's comment?
Chair, I'm going to jump in with an amendment.
Okay, go ahead.
With the exact same amendment. I think this is a good one. So I liked 16 a little bit better, but I hear staff saying they're comfortable with 15. So the amendment is to I don't know about replace, just make 15 feet the required height at bottom of structure. Minimum. Excuse me, yes.
Okay, so Anderson, Howard, did you want to speak to it any further?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. So when we built out the retail space in the bottom of the 360, we talked to a ton of people about what does failed retail look like, what does successful retail look like, and there's just a couple of things you really want to do. And one of the best examples of failed retail is, City of Austin, the City of Austin's Convention Center parking lot, the big parking garage along Cesar Chavez. We allowed them a really short ceiling, and it's just dead. It is always dead. And so the bigger the space, the larger the space, also the higher you want that ceiling height to be. And I want to make sure not to accidentally say top of ceiling, which is the way I almost read this, but maybe it didn't mean to do that. But once you have 15 or greater, then some people like to get in there and they have a little mezz level because they have a little office because it's a realtor. It just makes a whole lot of sense. And then, like Commissioner Leighton Burwell, I'm just giving architects the flexibility. And this is just saying that 15 floor minimum. So back in 2013, Mayor Pro Tem Cole wrote a resolution actually to get VMU and TODs an additional 5 feet because we kept hearing from everybody saying, look, we're trying to squeeze in these 4 resi on top of retail, and it's really, really tough. You can't let us do it. There's not enough feet. We just need 5 more feet to make the retail work. And so we kept compressing retail, which is what this is going to allow. And I just think when we have folks come in from out of town and build something and then they sell it, we want what they build and what they produce and to be on the ground to be great, moving forward and to really work for Austin versus something that might not. I think this has unintended consequences. And of course, I'd also like the direction that, we don't then reduce the height of the building. Hopefully that's, I don't know if I need to spell that out for staff in this motion, but we wouldn't want to see the height shrink by 3 feet.
Okay. Questions? Commissioner Layton Burwell?
Sorry, I'm a commercial architect. So you say retail. What about office? Are we asking that the, waiting area in Tom's dive shop or a little a store have a 15, 18-foot ceiling, but the waiting room is only 10 by 12, so it's disproportionately high. Is this just for retail? Is that the intent? Are we trying to create regulating lines along street frontage, which is kind of what I heard staff saying, versus trying to design projects from the dais here? I just find it problematic. And to only talk about retail on corridors, is that all that's going to happen on corridors? Where do people office?
When we wrote this resolution in 13 that we were told to not mess with because the new code rewrite would do it, it was just about retail. So I guess this is a question for staff. Staff, is this, as you envision it, just something for retail, or is this ground floor period throughout?
So this is really applicable only in the Main Street zones where that have a ground floor requirement for retail and other uses. It wouldn't be outside of those zones.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
It doesn't apply to RM or MU.
Other questions? All right, so we have an amendment on the table. Is there anyone speaking against? Speaking for? Neutral? I'll speak neutral. I think it accomplishes the same thing. 15 feet bottom of structure seems to me like it's very close to the 18 feet to the floor plate. It also seems like it's very close to the 12 feet flexibility because you're not reducing the height. That's what's giving you the flexibility. So this seems like a reasonable amendment. Let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Is there a reason to carry this on? Can we just take a vote for this? All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. This is back to the original motion, essentially the same thing. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. All right, Commissioner Kenny, you're going to have to, let's step this up a bit.
All right.
So we're 30 minutes per amendment here.
Yeah. I'm going to separate this one out alone, and hopefully we won't have any splitting for height, just because I think it's a matter of a lot of attention. So this is number 4, RM1 height. Set the height for RM1 in bonus configuration to not exceed 50 feet or 4 stories. Right now, the staff has acknowledged in their report that it was misconfigured. R4 bonuses up to 45 feet. McMansion tent houses are at 35 feet. So that's 2 to 3 stories. R4 is 4 stories with 45. 50 feet is a comfortable 4 stories. AIA's recommendation was for 55 feet for RM1. And my recommendation is to set both a story and a height here to clarify this is 4 stories, i.e., 1-ish story more than the McMansion. We need that height to, achieve the bonus units, is what AIA says. I want to make the bonuses work, but I also want to keep things as manageable as possible in transition zones so that they're not too crazy. And so 40 is clearly wrong, but I'm proposing that we just leave it in the base height so that you only get the height and the bonus, and clarify that it's also 4 stories so people don't worry about, does this really mean 5 stories? No, it just means 4. That's the amendment.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Azar. Staff?
So we don't oppose this. We understand that it would address some concerns about the height step down and the way that it's graduated from the corridor through the transition zones into the interior neighborhoods.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Shaw?
So I heard you say you only get the increased height as bonus? Okay, so that's going from what to what again? 45 to
40 to 50.
Okay.
So it's essentially another story.
Okay, so that's, I don't think that's in the
But bonus it had 45 already though.
It did not have a bonus.
No bonus. Yeah.
Okay.
Before it was just bonus and base of 40. And if you consult your handy chart that Commissioner Kinney made for you, it'll tell you.
Yeah, all right. But then I thought we had a long discussion about adding some zones to the mix for the transition area, and both of those failed. One was one that had increased height, 60, not 55. But I thought I heard staff said they're trying to that it came from council to create zones that were house scale. So is this still house scale if we're going 4 stories? Does that meet the council intent?
Sorry, can you repeat that last bit? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we allow this to go to 55 feet, is that still meet council intent for creating zones in the transition area that are house scale? Because I thought that's what you guys said was the goal in the RM1 and the R4.
Right. Yeah, in the transition zones, the base entitlements will be 35 R4, 40 RM1. I see 50 feet here. You mentioned 55. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, it's 50.
Okay. 50. Yes.
Okay. So it is it's higher. 50 is obviously higher than 45. 45 is the bonus entitlement in R4, and 35 feet is the base height allowed in the R2 zones. It's stepping down from a corridor, so it's going to be in between the corridor and those adjacent single-family homes. It's going to offer uses, I think, they're going to largely be house scale when they're built out. But I mean, you bring up an important point, I think, about where do you start to get away from house scale, and tell me if that's not what you're getting at. But
Trying to say I thought I heard you guys say that council was pretty explicit that they wanted house scale. So tell me what that is, and then are we going against what council wished with having these zones be house scale? That's all.
So I think in terms of the base zone, it is in that house scale, as Greg said, right? And this is one where the RM1 is mapped right behind the corridor fronting Main Street or right mixed use. So those are the more intensive zones. The RM1 is never going to be directly adjacent to an R2. It's always going to transition through an R4. So it would be the case that, again, the base of the RM1 is definitely in the house scale range. If the bonus were used, then it gets stretched. It does get a little bit of a bump, and it does move up.
And then just to add from the council direction, it does say transition areas should step down to residential house scale as quickly as possible while providing a graceful transition in scale from the zone of the parcel that's fronting on the activity corridor.
Commissioner Shaw, I think, didn't you propose something that was 65 feet?
60.
60 feet, okay.
Yeah,
Just checking.
I think we're starting to creep up to that and then add a bonus in height. We're starting to get there this
Okay.
way, kind of come from the other end, but it's good.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Shea?
I have a quick question. I mean, more about whether we should be calling this, I guess, wonder if it's RM1. I mean, I guess because of, I mean, this might be just nuances, as staff starts trying to figure out how to organize all these new zones, because we talked about adding a new zone and then we voted that down. I think it's maybe because it was 60, and now we're here another zone, but we're going to call it RM1, but it's a higher density. I mean, it's in effect, it's the same thing. So are we okay with keeping track of things just by adding additional zones versus calling it the same thing? I mean, but I don't know. I maybe it's not. It doesn't matter right now, just yet. So
I mean, I can explain our thinking, which was that I think everyone's acknowledged it was clearly an error to have R4 bonus to 45, but have RM1 stuck at 40. That doesn't do the graceful transition that council talked about. In my mind, R4 should be 3 stories because McMansion is like 2 to 3, and R4 should be 4 stories, and 60 is 5 stories. And,
Okay, and then the other question that I have is, we kind of picked this up last time, and then we voted against it, just looking at what we did. So are we able to pick this up again just because it says 50 instead of 60? Because if we voted on it once before.
I believe the prior vote was to create a new zone that was stepped up, or?
It was, well, it's using RM2. Is that new zone?
Okay.
So this is a modification of RM1, not a new zone or new mapping or anything like that. And it's within the purview of the working group.
Okay. I guess my concern is whether you hit it from RM1 or RM2. I don't know. I mean, I see this as a new zone, but that's fine. I mean, the staff has the intent, and then they'll take it from there. So
Any other questions, Azar?
Commissioner Kenny, can you please share what conversation you've had with AIA on this, and what would be heard regarding that height question on the bonus?
Sure. I'll just read their comments. They said for RM1, revise allowable height to be 45 base with 55 with affordable housing bonus. And then they said the allowed number of affordable units cannot be achieved on typical urban sites without the additional height. And I talked to them, and they said, 55 would allow you to put a gable on this. 50 keeps it at a flat roof. I would prefer the gable, but I think just in terms of public perception of this, that it's probably more valuable to have a lower number there, and to clarify the number of stories.
And so I'm just trying to understand. I feel like from the comments, it sounds like the bonus would not function without this sort of increase in height.
That was AIA's feedback, is the bonus would not work without the height.
Okay, thank you. That's
Commissioner
really
Azar, did you want staff to chime in as well?
Staff, yes, if you want to add something to that same question. Essentially, I guess we're hearing that the bonus would not function or would not be effective within that 40-foot height. Can you speak to that? And I'm also going to say, in the context of the fact that in R4 with a bonus, you can go to 45. So funnily enough, in R4 with a bonus, you go higher than RM1.
So the testing that we did with RM1, we found that for the most part you could get extra units without the height, but I mean it's obviously going to depend on the site conditions and the lot that you're looking at, and then the heights. Can you repeat your last question?
I guess I'm trying to say, I feel like within the R4, the understanding is that in order to have the viability to the bonus, you go from 35 to 45. And really, you're going from 4 units to 8. So in 8 units, you require 35 in R4. And then your modeling showed that you would only need 40 for 10 units in RM1.
Well, so in the RM1, it also has more impervious cover, so that's part of the increase in viability for the site. But and then in the R4 zone also, it's got the sidewall, the top plate that pinches the building a little bit. So it's got some other constraints that the height lets it kind of pop out of, basically, that the RM1 does not have. But you're right that the height, the base heights step down, but the additional 10 feet means that you kind of drop to 40, then we go back up to 45 if the bonus is taken in R4.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Last question, anybody? Commissioner Yanis Pulido.
So I'm just thinking about the step down, the transition from single family homes or triplexes or whatever all the way up to commercial. I'm not familiar with 35 resulting in 3 stories in a building. A McMansion, I think, typically limits homes to 2 stories. So it seems like a larger jump maybe than 1 to 2. And I'm also just wondering what the bonus would actually, what units are we talking about on site? How many? And I'm sorry if that's redundant, but I didn't understand clearly what we would get. Or is this just, I mean, AIA is saying they can't do it at all, and you all are finding you could do how many, roughly? What does this bonus actually get us in terms of affordability?
Are you asking about the affordability set aside?
Well, I guess that's a better clarification. This would be not on-site. Or would it be on-site? Do we get on-site units out of an increased height with this bonus?
Maybe Erica can speak to this, but if the bonus is taken, they can be provided on-site, or there's a fee in lieu option.
Erica Leak, Neighborhood Housing. So we'd have to pull up the maps to see what the percent set aside is, but I imagine in at least most of the city, the maximum required affordable unit would be 1 unit in both the R4 and RM1 zones. And we've had the discussion before about fee in lieu, or if they're going to be on site, potentially requiring developers to use like a certified entity that would provide the monitoring and certification, things like that.
Thank you. Yeah, so it hasn't looked good, but I guess, Vice Chair, is that the intent to have them, to provide them on site?
It depends what council says. We passed an amendment that said, on the first night here, that said in the susceptible, early, and dynamic areas, it would be required on site. Fee in lieu would be an option in the in areas outside of that. And it depends on how really, in my discussions with those in the building community, they said it really depends on how it's calibrated and how the fee in lieu is calibrated and how the on-site is calibrated, depending like which way you go. The calibration is critical.
And then to answer your question about McMansion, so it doesn't limit to 2 stories, but the FAR doesn't allow the 3rd story generally to get realized.
Right, and I said
currently.
Yeah, to answer that question. So I call McMansion 2 to 3 because what people do is they put the 3rd story in the middle or with the gables. But you can definitely get a full height 3rd story, just not for the entire envelope. So in my mind, a good transition is 2 to 3 stories in McMansion R2. R4 is more 3 across the way all the way, and RM1 gets you to a 4th because once you're in corridors, you're talking 5, 6, 7. So that it's not here in this amendment, but that's what I'm kind of thinking here.
Chair, can I ask a clarifying question to the motion maker?
Yes, if Yanis Pulido is done.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I believe, and staff might have to confirm, that they've, in their supplemental, they've gone to 45 feet. So would that change your height that you want to designate in here? If they've said now they're going to allow 45 feet on RM1, would that alter what you want to do?
I would say this amendment is silent upon that and not contingent upon it because the amendment only speaks to the bonus height and doesn't say increase it by 10. It says increase it to 50. My personal preference is to leave base heights alone and to capture as much value as possible through the bonus.
Okay.
All right, those are all the questions, commissioners. Is there a commissioner speaking against? Commissioner Shea?
So I'm going to have to speak against this. I mean, I appreciate what we're trying to do here, but we're not getting the affordability that we need. If really all this is going to yield is 1 unit and we're adding this height, and the intent is to put this up against the corridor lot, I think it should be higher. And maybe is it just because the wording we're calling it RM1 versus RM2? I mean, the whole idea is another zone that can actually get some affordable units. And so when our transition group was talking about when we were able to put right up against that 65 or 80 foot corridor lot and we can get to 60 feet, when we're bonusing up from 40 feet on up to 60, we get 2 extra levels we can actually get real bonus units that the city would like to monitor. This, we go with this thing as a fee in lieu. Now you got to find somebody who's going to manage this. I don't think this achieves what we're trying to get. And if this is really the one that's up against that corridor lot, we should be doing more. So I'm not for this. I think it's going to mess it up. So,
Commissioner speaking for, Commissioner Azar.
So I'll speak for, as we're talking, we're looking at it. So I think one is we're looking at that council direction and intent of going to a graceful height gradation. I'm looking at the R's up to R3 are 35 overall height, so 25 being the other one. R4 goes from 35 to 10, so it maxes out at 45 with the bonus. RM1 is at 40, and then RM2 goes from 40 with a 20 bonus to 60. So I feel like in that gradation we're talking about and that graceful rising, it makes sense that the maxed out at R4 is 45, maxed out at RM1 is 50, and then maxed out at RM2 is 60. So I think it gets to that graceful step down conversation that we've had. Two, I think if it leads to the viability of the bonus that we're hearing, there is a concern. I think that is something worthy of looking into, considering, and I think having staff look into making sure that that bonus is viable. I think hearing Commissioner Shea's point, that is a conversation that we did have within the transition working group, and I agree that I think having an increased number of bonus units would have been an ideal situation, and I personally actually agree with you that I think in terms of that step down, having another bonus related zone within that corridor would have actually led to more of the graceful gradation that we're talking about. In the absence of that, I think this is something that I think gets to a similar intent of a more graceful step down, and also I think speaks to the viability of the bonus. So that is why I would be voting for it.
Speaking against or neutral? Commissioner Seeger?
I'm speaking against. I remember the conversations in transition area working group, and we were trying to find something that fit into the space right adjacent to the front-facing corridor lot. But in this case, it's talking about a lot that could be on a residential street. And you can't have RM1 on residential streets?
Can't have RM1 adjacent to R2.
But aren't we mapped where we show RM1 and then the next, yes, is SF2.
R4.
R4.
R4, yes, but no R2s.
No R2s. But we're going to 50 feet. I just, for the return, I'd like to see more affordable units other than one fee in lieu to justify this increase in height. That's where I'm coming from.
Speaking for, Commissioner Shaw.
So just, Commissioner Azar, I think you mentioned RM2. Just to be clear, it's not in the transition zone. To just know we don't have access to that. But I'm just a little frustrated because I think we worked hard in trying to find what we're trying to get here. But I think it is an improvement. It is what we were trying to do is backfill against that corridor, corridors, and maybe even deeper. But I think it gets us a little closer to what the goal was. But I am a little disappointed that I didn't have support for what I think we're trying to do here with the RM2.
That's fair. Last commissioner speaking against. Commissioner Yanis Pulido.
I just think we're giving way too much. I don't feel very confident about the affordability that we're getting. I know there's calibration to be done with fee and lieu and all of that, but by and large, I think if we're giving additional height, I think this is helpful for return on an investment and not necessarily in affordability. And I just have to say, I appreciate the insight of AIA, but I've also heard from at least 4 architects who are really upset with the positions that they have sent and that they have not been consulted as members on that position. So I'm not sure how representative the AIA positions are of the entire architectural body, even that makes up its own membership. If I'm wrong on that, can be corrected, but I'm hearing this from multiple voices, and I just want to put that out there because when it comes to sort of AIA's calculation versus staff calculation, I don't want to assume that that is a completely representative body of architects. And I just think we need to be getting more. This is every time we increase the entitlements, we're basically granting value as a city. We're giving it away. And I'd like to propose some stuff around value capture with that if this goes through, but otherwise I think we should be getting a better trade-off.
Okay, that's 3 and 3. Sorry. Yeah. Let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so that motion passes 9-3.
Okay, hopefully that's kind of contentious stuff. Maybe we can speed up a little bit here.
Said that last time.
Number 5, and I have a slight change to the wording here. Left alone is this is recalibrate bonus heights in RM, MU, MS, and UC zones. The chart goes along with this, but it's not part of the suggested text. I would suggest this as text, but I'm not going to ask us to vote on that. The actual vote says increase heights under bonus configurations only, in RM2, RM3, RM5, MU1, MU2, MU3, MU4, and MS3 to match natural building heights and sync one of UC's heights to UNO's 300-foot height. And then the addition is, and East Riverside Corridor's 160-foot height. Period. UC base heights should match the height of existing zones that are rezoned to UC to capture the height increase fully in the bonus. So if you look at the chart, we'll start with UC down at the bottom there. I have 60 there because that's what almost all the zones that are something today and will get rezoned as UC, they're almost all 60 feet. So this would effectively, and we can leave the implementation up to staff, to be a 60-foot. And then, UNO and East Riverside Corridor both use 300 feet. Capitals 311 feet. UT Towers 307 feet. So 300 is a height we're using. 160 is a height that we're using. I'd like to be able to kind of match up with that and not depend on overlays. And then for the other ones, I'll just start at the top. We already did RM1. And if you want to, you can follow along in the natural height breaks thing that we found here, which is that we found that 60 foot is really squashed, and all architects and builders in town that I talk to hate it, and they just say 5 more feet and I can build the 5 stories there. So it changes a couple of 60s to 65s. You'll notice that so RM2 goes to 65, and I'm suggesting the RM3 that there be a gradient between the RM490 and the RM260. So one floor up is 75. RM5, we discussed that a natural height break is 135 due to a fire code. I would suggest 40 feet or 3 stories in the bonus for MU1. It's supposed to be compatible with residential scale zones, and so be only 5 feet difference. MU2, the same, 50 feet or 4 stories to match what we did with RM1. The interesting thing about that height is that it allows 4 stories of residential, but only 3 of office, so it favors residential to be built. And then 65 for MU3, 75 again, a step where there's no bonus height now, so that makes that bonus more attractive and produce more affordable units. And then for MS3, 85 isn't, 90 is really the fire code break there. So these are just suggestive, but you can see what I have in mind here. Our research indicates that the heights that are provided in the draft zone either don't provide a bonus height, so we don't get as much value out of the bonus, or they don't comply with natural height breaks based on either form or fire code.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Thompson. Staff?
So generally, we are not opposed to additional height through the bonus. I think in the UC zones, not opposed to adding a subzone that starts at 60, but may want to keep those other subzones that start base higher, just because in the future there may be projects or areas where it's really desired for development to be focused, and it might be just desirable to give that higher by right as a starting point. So not opposed to adding a 60 subzone, but keeping the others.
So just to reclaim the balance of my time here, the intent language just says whatever the height it was zoned from. So maybe there's a procedure or something that just says if you get rezoned, it's whatever it was before. I'm leaving that up to you guys. Maybe it's a number, maybe it's a procedure. I will say that so the Evolve Coalition came out with a statement opposing this one because they didn't want to see the UC drop down to 60. Everybody is terrified that the bonuses are not going to be calibrated correctly, that all these bonus heights that we're talking about are just theoretical because they're priced such as that they only work in some parts of town. So I think this is something where I'm holding a line personally and saying, no, let's not increase base heights. But I would really ask that we pay a lot of attention to calibration. I'm going to bring a calibration amendment on the last day's individual. It's just absolutely critical that calibration be gotten right, both to make sure that bonuses are viable and to make sure that we're getting the maximum amount of units out of it. So I'm proposing that we hold the line on the base, but that's got to come along with making sure that we calibrate the bonuses correctly.
Questions? If there's no questions, I'd like to make an amendment to add sort of what Greg said about adding a subzone that's at 60 but leaving the rest alone. I can see how future mapping could benefit from those zones being there.
Can I reread the intent language?
Sure.
So we say that UC base height should match the height of the existing zones that are rezoned into UC.
Say that one more time.
UC base heights should match the height of existing zones that are rezoned into UC.
Okay, so it's not what's written here. Okay. Greg, is that sort of what you were suggesting? That as long as they match what's there?
I think that would work. I think the important thing from our perspective is just that remains a broad spectrum of base entitlements for that zone.
And Commissioner Kinney, have you studied those to know that there is a spectrum?
Well, today there's not a spectrum. Today everything maxes out at 60 unless you're MF6, and then you get 90.
Okay.
In the future, there are, as you can tell from your handy chart, stuff is, I guess that the stuff that gets rezoned into it probably has a base of 60, maybe 90, 65. I think the intent is the important thing here, and I'll maybe they want to create a set of base heights. Maybe it's a procedure, but I think the important thing is to capture the value and not increase the height by right.
I think I understand. I'm going to stick to my amendment, though. I'm going to say to maintain or achieve a spectrum of UC base heights. That's my amendment. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Shaw. Questions? Commissioner Azar?
I have some questions for staff, so I'm just trying to understand. One, I see that UC has not been mapped widely, so it's a very small mapped area. Where is currently UC mapped?
Good evening, Lacey Patterson with Planning and Zoning Department. UC is mapped in 2 regional centers in this current draft. The South Central Waterfront Regional Center, where there's currently the lake zone applied. It's a very, this is the only location where the zoning which is in our current code lake, is applied, and that does have a base entitlement height, I believe, of up to 200 feet. So when we mapped UC on those properties, we tried to make it match those height entitlements kind of to the best of our ability. And then the other mapped area is in the Highland Mall Regional Center, and it conforms to the lines of the draft small area planning initiative that was taken into account there. kind of to Commissioner Kinney's point earlier about the 120-foot height allotment, I believe, or 150-foot height allotment. In that draft plan, there were areas denoted as where there could be exceeded height, and we mapped the UC to where that boundary was. And so it's those two regional centers that it's mapped.
So I think I understand in the case of South Central Waterfront, in the Highland where it's mapped to 120 based on the sort of future plan or planning, I'm not going to get the words right, but essentially whatever the planning effort was, what is the current there? Do you have any idea?
The current, I believe, is CS, so 60 base.
So 60 base. So if I'm hearing correctly, in South Central Waterfront, it's equivalent. We're matching equivalent to equivalent. Yes. But then in Highland Mall, we're seeing a jump from 60 to 120 without capturing it in the bonus.
Yes, that's correct.
And I don't know if you would know this, but whenever that plan was done, was that a conversation? Was that a specific conversation in saying that we should increase base heights without trying to capture it in an affordable bonus?
No, I can't speak to any of those conversations.
Okay. I think that answers my question. And so if we say that we keep it to, so we have the gradations for future zoning, but can we at least say that we ensure that it's mapped equivalent? And I understand that in the case of Highland it might be tricky because we have a plan. I'm not sure what all went into that. So I don't want to say I want to go against the plan's intent, but I would like to understand.
From my recollection, there is no intent to specify between bonus and base per se. So I don't think it would go against the intent to make sort of kind of the subzone height at 60 and up to the full height through the bonus.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions? Speaking against?
Can you restate your motion again? I'm sorry.
So my motion is to at the end to say where it says decrease. Well, I don't know if it says decrease anymore, but if we add to the end, maintain and achieve a spectrum of a spectrum of zones with UC base heights.
Can I make a substitute?
Yes.
So, and I'm sorry, I did not get to note down the language perfectly. So this would say in the end now, maintain and achieve a spectrum of heights in the UC zone for future use and map to equivalent today or something like that. I don't know what the exact language is, but somebody can help me. Staff, does that get to, I guess, what I was trying to say? So mapping to the equivalent height today for the UCs where it is mapped. Does that make sense?
I think that language is already in there. Commissioner Kinney, can you help us out here?
Yes. Can someone help me out?
So the base blank, if your amendment was supplementary rather than substitution.
Right. It was supplementary. It was added to the end.
So then what it read is UC base heights should match the height of existing zones that are zoned into UC, but a wide range of base heights should also be created.
I think that gets to the idea, yeah. A wide number of zones, UC height zones would be created for future use. Does that get to it?
So you're making a substitute amendment, so you can add that as your amendment.
But I want to make sure that I think I capture. This is a question to you. Does that go against your intent?
No, that's in line.
Okay, so can you please repeat the text again? I'm sorry.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is UC bonus heights should match. I'm sorry, UC base heights should match the height of existing zones that are zoned into UC, but a wide range of base heights should be available for futures
mapping.
For future mapping?
Yes, so that would be my substitute.
Okay. Is there a second for that? Second by Seeger. Okay. Staff? Confused?
I think that's a math base.
So, and then just to clarify, and maybe I missed this, but is this direction regarding the existing map, particularly, is as regarding the airport area.
Wherever currently UC is mapped.
Yeah, this amendment, I think the intent does make sense. Keep the base the same if a new UC has the base the same as today, but the height and the bonus can extend further.
And the other UC heights, basins
And then the
could be
spectrum.
applied in the future as needed.
Right,
In
right.
areas that
Yeah, I think that intent is clear.
where it sounds feasible.
Okay, so the intent is clear, and staff's position is,
Yes, we understand, and I think we are okay with how it's being presented.
okay, which is not the same as whether you agree or not.
We agree.
Okay.
We concur.
Got it, okay. Questions? All right, speaking against?
Can I speak to my motion?
Go ahead.
So I'm just going to speak to my motion. I feel like, I'll be honest, I think in the absence of me knowing a lot about the Highland Mall planning effort, I think my intention here is not to circumvent whatever planning effort happened there, and I would need to know more. So I would ask staff to sort of figure out where that makes sense. But I think my hope is that particularly in that area where we're going to see increased development, increased height without actually redevelopment, I would hope that we can actually capture more of that height and bonus and build a number of affordable units, because I feel like, I think to the conversation we just had right before this, that and South Central Waterfront seem like places where we would want increased affordable housing, and also I think there's more opportunity for increased height, considering we're not massively redeveloping existing housing. So,
Questions? Speaking against? Speaking neutral? Speaking for?
Neutral.
Go ahead.
When the evolve comment was brought up, I think that kind of aligned with my concern as well. But the amendment that was proposed, it seems like it's kind of getting to what Commissioner Yanis Polito was talking about, not giving it all away and maybe helping that situation. So that's why I'm neutral.
So can you help us understand that? I think we are not giving anything away in this.
That's what I'm saying, is that it seems like there may be more room for bonus with that amendment.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'll speak for.
Go ahead.
I think that this builds in the flexibility that and when there are future rezones, that just stuff matches the base height and not be actually a down zone. And I want to be clear that Evolve opposed going down to 60, not necessarily to just matching the existing height, but the consistent fear that I've heard from those in the building community is that, you know, these bonuses are great and all, but if they're not calibrated right, all I've got is the base. So I think this is a good amendment.
Okay. Anyone else? Let's take a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Abstaining? Okay, so that motion passes 11-1. Back to the main motion. I don't think this one needs any further discussion. Speaking against? Speaking for or neutral? Let's take a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Abstaining? Okay, that motion passes 11-1, and the previous one was also 11-1. Andrew, one more? Okay, let's do one more.
All right, I got bundles coming later where I think we can bundle a bunch of stuff together, but I think this one has to be alone because it's the only IC amendment that I have in non-resi, and I almost even wanted to drop it, but I consulted with some folks and they thought it was actually pretty important. So it's number 7. There's a slight modification to it. Don't count overhangs against impervious cover. And it says match non-residential zones to residential zones by not applying incidental overhangs of up to 2 feet, is how it's changing, to impervious cover caps. This is what we do for residential. This kind of gets to the point where it's like we apply these stricter standards if you have more than 2 families living on a lot for some reason. And I think when you have an overhang and there's pervious cover right below it and the rain falls off the overhang right there, it's going to drain in that 4-foot wide area. So I've been advised that people don't understand why this is in there, and that's why, and that it effectively reduces the impervious cover that's actually allowable, even though you're required to build that amount of pervious cover into all your calculations. So,
second, Commissioner Hempel, thank you. Staff, I know Andrea had something yesterday.
Yes, thank you, Andrea Bates with the Watershed Protection Department. We would prefer to not make this change because even though the eaves or other overhangs can be incidental, they do fundamentally act as impervious cover. The rainfall hits them, it concentrates and collects and is discharged to one point instead of going to the ground and infiltrating in a manner that would occur if there were no impervious cover intercepting it. We do recognize that it's done differently through the residential review process, which would currently apply to 1 and 2 family residential, and I understand the point about leveling the playing field for the small scale missing middle. And I hadn't thought about the fate of the missing middle that will go through the streamlined regulation process, because there is a disconnect that's based on the review process now rather than the, specifically the number of units or the impervious cover limit. It might get extended because there are limits in residential review that essentially there's been a practice and require this accounting for eaves. But that aside, we'd prefer not to extend it further into multifamily or commercial that will continue to have the full site plan review extent, because they are capable of reviewing eaves as impervious cover and then doing the verifications in the field to make sure it's constructed as expected. And fundamentally, from Watershed's perspective, it's acting as impervious cover, just like balconies, just like cantilevered sections of the building. And so we'd prefer it be counted.
So if I can use the balance of my time, your question. So we're talking about buildings that are no less than 40, 45 feet, up to 90, 135 feet, and a 2-foot overhang. At that height, it seems like the wind is more of a factor than actually the overhang. So I'm struggling to understand that.
I understand, and I had the exact same conversation with other staff in Watershed Protection this morning, thinking about our response to this and knowing that the question comes up about what if the overhang is so high off the ground, essentially. And the answer was that we consider it basically in, I think, what you would call plan view, imagining that rain is coming straight down. Because over time, sometimes wind is from one direction, creating a rain shadow, and sometimes it's from the other. But on a balance, that the rain is being intercepted by the roof that's part of the overhang, and then it's being concentrated and it's being discharged in a way that changes the infiltration and the runoff that otherwise would have occurred in that space.
Thank you. I'm going to offer an amendment to my own amendment. I'm going to offer the amendment that this applies to 10 units and less, so that missing middle is on the same playing field as residential. And I would just like to point out to commissioners that what this would do is make this more strict than what I'm proposing. So if you vote in favor of this amendment, you're essentially saying, yes, we should allow it for missing middle, but not for the others. Whereas if you vote against it, then you're setting up the vote to just say, no, let's not have it for anybody. Does that make sense? Did I express that clearly? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you are in favor of having a special situation for missing middle, you vote in favor of the amendment. If you don't like the standard at all, I would probably vote against the amendment.
I'm trying to see if that works. Seems like it's backwards. Wouldn't you want the amendment to?
Because if we approve the amendment and then approve the underlying motion, then what we'll have is overhangs allowed for missing middle, but not for other commercial.
Okay, I see. So you're consciously doing an amendment, not a substitute. Got it.
I'm offering commissioners a chance to, if they're comfortable with this only for missing middle, to vote for this.
Gotcha.
I may vote against it.
You're not giving the others a chance, though.
No.
Got it.
So I have a question for staff.
Let me get a second real quick. Second by Azar. Okay. Staff already responded. So questions, go ahead.
So if this is something that we want to use just for missing middle, and you mentioned it's something that could go through that process, the process is still being created, right? I mean, we don't have it yet. So it potentially could be incorporated anyway into it. Is that correct? I mean, is it on consideration right now, or is it hasn't even been discussed in that site plan light process? Because, I mean, that's what this missing middle is going to go through. And if missing middle is going to keep it nice and simple, that basically, all right, we're just going to take the base footprint, then this goes through pretty easily. I guess what I'm trying to see is if you guys are already considering it for missing middle. I mean, I understand for not commercial, but where are you right now on that site plan light process?
So I would invite Donna or Brent to join me. But when I think about the site plan light, I'm focused on determining which watershed and drainage regulations apply to that category of development. Mm-hmm. And so that would be silent on this particular issue. It would say that they're subject to the zoning impervious cover limit, but it wouldn't give direction that this particular element be exempt from impervious cover.
So maybe.
And our recent discussions, it seems like because there's a much less of an emphasis on process and more on the requirements, if missing middle projects continue to go through a level of review that doesn't have the same constraints as today's 1 and 2, then they wouldn't need this allowance for the incidental eaves. But if they end up in what looks more like the residential camp, then they might.
Right, I got you. So could someone speak to that? Maybe Donna, does Donna want to speak to that? I'm just kind of curious on the whole site plan light process for the missing middle on things like this. I mean,
Sure.
What are we envisioning on the process? Is it to be more residentially or more commercial, especially something like this?
Donna Galati with Development Services. We're really focusing on, or not focusing on the term site plan within the new code.
Okay.
We're focusing on regulations applying appropriately to various levels of development, and then the code is written to require staff to scale submittal requirements to those regulations. And it's hard to, think about, because our world today is set up in this very much like everything is either this giant site plan or you get the residential plan review, which is a site plan with the building, or rather it's a building permit in context with the site. And a site plan is just the context of the site, and then you go get your building permit later. It's hard to describe the ability to really enable a paradigm shift such that we can scale these requirements and look for opportunities to find things that are very unique. For example, in today's world, we have a boat dock application that represents a scaled application based on the applicable requirements, right? And so if we imagine that the code was always written such that we scale requirements, then we're kind of a step ahead. We could look and say, oh, look, we have this
running out of time.
application.
So how are you with the intent of this?
The intent is
for missing middle.
Right. The intent is that we'll be able to identify ways to capture an application, sort of an easy step. We'll be able to capture like these regulations apply to this, and this is the easier step to get to permitting.
Okay.
Am I allowed to make a substitute motion?
Yes.
I would like to just add briefly, if I can.
Well, you're going to have to wait until someone asks a question. Okay. Go ahead.
Can I ask you to? I'm asking a question. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. I concur with everything that Donna just said, but I do want to just add that the concept of site plan exemption continues to be present in the proposed code, and the 3 to 8 residential units would still continue to be site plan exempt. But to echo what Donna said, the intention of the code is not to focus so much on permitting jargon, but to be clearer than current code is about what the rules are for particular kinds of development, and then give staff the authority to scale the submittal requirements to those actual regulations that apply. And so this kind of project, the 3 to 8 residential, would fall within what we're calling the limited site plan review process. And so the code very much signals that these projects are not to be reviewed using the full range of plans that would be required to be submitted with the site plan. But how that works out is going to have to be worked on by staff through revising, the permitting application forms and the other criteria that will have to be dealt with during implementation.
And since I have a little bit of time, I have a question for Andrea. So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that for missing middle, it would be appropriate to not count the eaves towards impervious. Did I understand that correctly?
It seems like there will be a process where we don't need to exempt eaves for the reasons that they're currently exempt for residential. So from a watershed perspective, we would prefer that they continue to be counted for missing middle because we don't think that will cause a review or inspection problem. And they are having the effect of impervious cover, so we should treat them like impervious cover.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Questions? On the amendment, Commissioner Layton-Burwell.
Just to clarify, missing middle includes a duplex?
Not the way that I'm using it.
The amendment is for up to
Right,
10
but-
units. The amendment states up to 10 units.
Okay, thank you.
Last question on the amendment. This is the amendment only for 10 units or less. Let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstaining? Okay. So that motion fails. 4, 5, 3. Now we're back to the main motion. Questions on the main motion?
It's time for substitute.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, kind of opening my eyes here, I think for consistency and the ability to capture IC from eaves from residential units, the large number of residential units, I would propose that overhangs are counted against IC for all zones. Overhangs are counted against the impervious cover for all zones for consistency and to make sure we capture that portion of IC from all those residential units.
Commissioner Shaw, is this going to override the amendment we just did? Okay.
It's
a
substitution
to the main.
To the full
Main, got it.
amendment.
Okay. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Seeger. Staff? You don't have to respond, but you can.
That would meet Watershed's interest. If residential review were here to speak, they may be able to describe why being able to exclude the eaves is important for them, but be consistently counting them across the board is good from a watershed perspective.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Commissioner Azar?
So I have a question for staff or any of the folks on here who design. What kind of impact would this have on design in general? Like we're talking about the active frontages yesterday and the porches and everything. What impact would this have? Anyone can respond to that.
It decreases the amount of impervious cover that you can put. So technically, if you had like awnings and eaves and stuff that didn't count, right? So let's say I built up to 45%, and then all of a sudden I had to add all the eaves. I just busted my FAR. So it changes residential design approach considerably because now we have to count all of these.
And so would discourage eaves and...
Well, your building would definitely have to get smaller because we have to account for all all the awnings and eaves and
Or your eaves will get smaller.
yeah. Or your eaves. Well, your eaves will all get smaller.
I mean, so
you can make
essentially,
the buildings.
I guess if I hear you correctly, is either we would have to make a smaller building or get rid of eaves altogether and have just cubes.
Well, we see a lot of those right now.
Yeah.
So.
I know. And I'm just thinking of eaves. I do believe in eaves. I'm sorry,
But
staff.
it's-
I feel like
yeah.
did somebody want to respond to that?
Gets rid of eaves.
I know
Or
I
just
like
makes the
eaves.
smaller
I'm
buildings.
thinking of even the buildings at UD, like
But-
the old Gilbert buildings
but-
have those huge eaves. And
But let's also keep in mind that we also have unlocked, if we do smaller buildings, but we've also unlocked third levels, so they also get taller.
So
So
yeah.
that's the other thing that we
So
do.
if I could quickly respond to that. So I just did some math here. If it's a 30 by 60, 1,800 square foot, the eve is about 20% if we did 2 feet. And so we would be taking away 20%. And eaves are important because, I mean, this is, you're going to need them for design and sun shading and so on.
And I feel like we've talked about character and the active frontages, and I feel like some of the design principles we were seeing, it seems like eaves are an important aspect of that. But thank you for responding to that.
And just to clarify, so the amendment is not to get rid of eaves, it's just to count them, but reducing
And I guess my question was, but it could disincentivize eaves.
Yes.
And I think what I'm hearing is yes, it could.
And it'll make a lot of buildings out there non-complying.
Okay, so other questions? Commissioner Seeger.
Yes, my question is, that's very interesting that would take up 20% of the impervious cover by having a 2-foot eve. Now, is a 2-foot eve the common building practice? I mean, that seems like it's kind of... And could we lower the eaves down or make it larger, let's say larger, if they're 3 feet they count, because would that be out of proportion though for the building architecture? See, I don't know that.
So current code has a certain amount that you're exempt from, and then if it gets bigger, then it gets counted. And if staff could chime in on that, just to verify the amount that you get and then any overage.
I believe currently the practice is 2 feet.
Right, that you get a freebie,
That
and
you
then
get
more
free,
than that, yeah.
And then more than that is counted.
Then it's counted.
So
it's
you
not-
can still have your
For residential.
For
2-foot
residential.
eve, and only if you go beyond that would it count towards IC. Because
This is current practice for residential.
Current code.
That's current
That's
code.
current code. Right. The amendment is to exempt all of the
No. The amendment is to count all eaves, no exemptions, nothing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So
Paradigm
just to
shift.
clarify, staff, something you just said is if it's 2 feet, you don't count it. But if you're discouraging larger eaves, so if it's over 2 feet in residential, they do count that against the impervious cover?
That is my understanding.
That's current practice, okay.
Although my understanding is if there's a 5-foot overhang, for example, you're still spotted the 2 feet, and so you'd count the 3.
Okay.
It's not all or nothing.
So either I didn't hear that or that's new to me. So I think I like the idea of allowing the 2 feet per the current. So maybe we're back to, I think, Kenny's 2 foot.
Yeah.
So it's.
Are you withdrawing or?
Well, the language, yeah, withdrawing, but then we could, tell me if we change it to overhangs greater than 2 feet are counted against impervious cover for all zones.
It says up to 2 feet already, so
Sorry,
that's already done.
I put
Okay.
that language in when I introduced it.
All
Sorry.
right, so we're back to the.
It says 2 feet.
Back to the original motion. So all of Commissioner Kenny's easy ones are taking longer than 30 minutes here. Let's
I
move.
didn't say this was an easy one.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, questions on the main motion? I haven't had any questions on the main motion yet. Or speaking against? Speaking for? Let's take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? 2, 3, 4, 5. Abstaining? 2, okay. 552. That motion fails. And we are going to take a break. The time is 7:38. We will take a 22-minute break. Back at 8. All right, commissioners. It's 8:12. I'd like to reconvene. We have a quorum on the dais. We're missing Commissioner Anderson. All right. So before we jump into this, let's get an extension on the time for tonight. And also let's get a start time for Monday. Let's try to do an earlier start than 5 if possible. So for tonight, is there a motion to go to 11:30 or midnight?
I'll make a motion for 11:30.
11:30. Second by Shay. All right, all those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes 11-0. Now let's go to Monday. Is there a motion for 4 or 3?
12 noon.
12 noon. Is there a second? There's no second.
I didn't think so.
Well, could we say, everyone raise your hand if you can be here at 4? You're out entirely, right? Are you? You're okay? Okay, let's start at 5. Who can be here at 5? And then how many do we lose at 4? We lose 2 at 4. How many do we lose at 3?
Oh, we lose 3 at 4. I think Greg has.
You can or cannot be here at 4. So we lose 2 at 4.
Well, Ann Schneider is not in either.
And Howard.
And Howard. So 3. Oh, is Azara as well. So 3.
Czar, Howard. I thought, Carmen, did I see your hand go down? No? Or Shay? Did I see your hand go down?
Azara, Howard, Schneider.
And Shay.
And Shay for 4? Okay. All right, so 5 then. 5 to midnight.
Yeah.
Maybe. All right. All right, let's jump right into this thing.
All right. In the spirit of brevity, that I hope maybe other commissioners can
Chair,
join
Commission
me.
Liaison Andrew Ritter, how about Tuesday?
Oh. Are we already?
So
at
Andrew
5?
just gave me some news about us having 5 discussion cases on Tuesday. So it's a regular meeting, so we just have to account for that. So that's going to be, I think, an early start would be very, very helpful.
Could we start maybe at 3 and go to 6, then open up the public hearing?
Yeah, we can do 3 to 6 and then take discussion and then pick up again. So we'll be doing Monday 5 to midnight and then Tuesday again.
Tuesday at 3?
Tuesday at 3. Let's take just raise our hands just to see who's available. Okay, everyone but 3. Yvette, Greg, and you're not available. Okay, so that's 5.
About 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock?
How about 4?
Okay. 5 o'clock. All right. Let's do 5. And can we start the other one a little bit later? Can we get an hour and a half? Okay.
Chair, can I also request that for Tuesday we change our rules for the regular meeting? Discussion rules and shorten the times.
Okay, yeah, we can take that up then. Okay, thank you.
Okay. In the spirit of brevity, which I hope everyone else can maybe join in and keep moving, I'm going to drop number 9, number 11, number 12, number 14, although I'm going to be coming back with something about schools and individuals, and number 18, which I think staff is probably going to do on their own.